Hi everyone, this video is going to be focused on showing you what factorising is, specifically for factorising quadratics. Okay, I want to show you what it's all about, why we do it. Okay, so let me just start off with writing this. So most people, before they do quadratics, they get quite happy with what we call expanding brackets, which you've probably seen before. The reason I'm showing you this is so I can relate it back to factorising. Okay, so a lot of people use the grid method. Some people use the old-fashioned method, which I was taught. So happy if you want to use the grid method for this, or if you want to use the old method. I'm not very familiar with the grid method, but I know roughly how it works. So we have x times by x here, which gives us x squared. We have 4 times by x here, which will give us 4x. 2 times by x here, which is 2x. And we have 2 times by 4, which is 8. And we put this all together, which will give us x squared. We have these two here, which need to be added, which will give us 6x plus 8. Okay? And that is how we could expand that. The other way is by doing it this way, which is what we call the FOIL method. X times by x giving us x squared again. Any number times itself is something squared. Then we do the first times the last, x times by the 4, which gives us 4x. 2 times the x, which is 2x. And we have 2 times 4, which is 8. You'll see again in the middle, this will turn into just 6x, which gives you the same as what we have there. So that's expanding. So the reason I've shown you that is because expanding and factorising are opposites of one another. Okay, so you can interchange between them. Okay, so they're opposites. So if I was to start off with the answer that we had, I could actually go ahead and try and factorise this, and that will give me what I started with, this here. Okay, just show you how that works. So we have an 8 here at the end. I look for numbers that are factors of 8, which are 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. And then I add these. So this one will add to give me 9, and this one adds to give me 6. And you notice I see a 6 there. And so 2 and 4 is the correct pair. I then add 2 brackets in, knowing that there's an x at the front of both, because remember, x times by x gives you x squared. And then all I need to do is write it's positive 2 and a positive 4. And you see that's factorised, giving you exactly what we had at the start. There you go. So as we progress through this, I'll teach you a bit more about factorising, and we'll move on to solving and what that means as well. So let's have a go at factorising another one. What should we do this time? Okay, so again, number at the end, I'm looking for factors. So that could be 1 and 15, 3 and 5. And if I add these, I get 16 and 8. And you see there's an 8 there, so it would be this combo. And simply write it like that because they're both positives. Okay, so that's how you do the factorising. Now, what's solving? Okay, if I said solve, the only difference is you'll have a quadratic, which is the same, but it will be equal to 0. Okay, so okay, so if I had this one and it said solve, it would actually be equal to 0. That would be the difference. So you just factorise it like you had before. 24 here, we've got 1 and 24, we've got 2 and 12, we've got 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And if you add all these, we get 25, 14, 11, and 10. Noticing we have a 10 there, so that is the correct pair. So that x looks horrible. Now, because this is equal to 0, we can now actually do the solving part, which is where we can actually find the values of x. And all we simply do is whatever sign we see here, we just reverse that. So we'll get -4 for this one, and we'll get -6 for that one. Okay? Now you might be wondering, what the hell does that mean? So let me just show you. If we look back at this expression at the top, what I can actually do, if I write that here, if I imagine a bracket where all the x's are, okay, I'm just rewriting the top except with a bracket in. What I can do is, where I see the x, is I can replace it with one of these numbers. So let's start with the -4. So if I replace that with -4, it's horrible, and work this out, okay, -4 squared is actually -4 times -4. So that actually is 16, since we've got times in two negatives. So we get 16 for that. Here we've got +10 times -4, which gives me -40. And then I have +24 on the end. If I do 16 add 24 first, I get 40. And then that then gives me 0. And you can see that's what I wanted here. So that tells me that this value is good. And if I was just to check the other one, this should also be 0. So again, whenever I square a negative or a positive, it's always going to be positive. So here that would be 36. Positive times negative here, giving us -60, and then +24. Adding the 36 and the 24 gives me 60, and you can see that that gives me 0 at the end again. So both of those are good. Okay, and that's what we mean by solving. We're trying to find the values of x for which this equation gives us an answer of 0. And for a quadratic, you'll usually find there's 2. Sometimes there's only 1, but usually there's 2. Okay? So, let's keep going. Now, why do we do solving? Let's get another page up. So the reason we do solving is because it's going to find what we call the x-intercepts. Another word for that would be roots or solutions. They all mean the same thing. So what is that? Well, if we was to look at a quadratic graph, not always, but sometimes we will find that it will cross the x-axis at 2 points. Okay, so it might look something like this. Okay, and where it crosses here, these are what we call the x-intercepts, because we have the x-axis here, and these 2 points is where the x-axis is crossed, and that's what we call the x-intercepts, or root solutions, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so that's why we're doing it. And why does that help? Because it helps us to sketch graphs. So the next question I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you how to sketch a graph, and obviously by having to do that question we need to do solving within that, so you're going to see exactly what solving is all about. Okay, so let me just make a question. I've got it over here, can't I? So if I said sketch y equals x squared, should we do it here? So I could do let's do 7 actually. We'll do that. Okay. So sketch this. So the way we're going to sketch it is, the first thing we need to think of is trying to solve it. Solving it is going to give us the x-intercepts, which will help us. Okay? So that means we need to solve when the quadratic is equal to 0. Now, why equal to 0? Why do we have to do this when we solve? The reason is because originally it was y equals this quadratic. So what we're effectively saying is we're finding when y equals 0. Okay, now what does that mean? On here we have the graph, and you would see that we have the values 1, 2, 3 going up like this, positive, and then it'll be negative going this way. And so 0 is actually in the middle there. And you can see that these points actually line on with 0. Okay? So this is where y equals 0, and by setting it equal to 0, we're actually going to find these x coordinates here, which will help us sketch it. So let's go and do that. We've got 12 at the end, so I'm thinking 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. If I add all these, I get 13, I get 8, and I get 7. And you can see I have a 7 there. So I need to pick this combination. So x plus 3 and x plus 4. Going down from these, remember, we just reverse the sign that we see. So instead of positive 3, we'll have x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 4. These are the x-intercepts. So if I was to start trying to draw that out, this is my y-axis. There's my x-axis. So minus 3 and minus 4. Okay, let me just extend this out a little bit. So these are my x-intercepts. It's actually going to cross these points right here. And there's one more point I need to be concerned with when I'm trying to sketch it. So whenever you have a quadratic graph, another thing to be aware of is if you go right back to the start where we see this sketch question, the number here right on the end, 12, this is also the y-intercept for any quadratic, the number at the end. So that's going to tell me where the y-axis gets crossed. So if that's 12 there, okay, this is only a sketch, by the way, it doesn't have to be accurate. And if I just draw my graph on here, it's also got to have a U shape, meaning like this. Some of them have an N shape. Now, how you figure that out is if you look at the front of a quadratic here. Okay, there's actually a number 1 right there. And if the number's positive, then you will end up with a U-shaped graph. And if the number's negative, you'll end up with an N-shaped graph, upside down. But if it was to be negative, you would have a minus in front of the x squared term, or you would see something like minus 3x squared. You would see a negative sign, okay, and that's when you know it would be this shape. So most of the time it will be a U shape, and that's what we have here. So to draw this, it's going to look something like this. It's going to go through that. It's also got to go through, you try and draw that again. It's got to go through all of these, quite hard to do. So it's going to be symmetrical in the middle as well, which is nice. So it goes through that 3. It's also got to go through that 12 there. And then it's got to curl around, go through the 4, minus 4, and curve back up like that. Okay? So as long as you're hitting through the points that you've sketched on like that, that's where you're going to get your 3 marks from sketching. Okay? So I'll go ahead and do another one. Now I've shown you that. So if I said sketch, what could we have here? So so here we're looking for a number that times us to make 36. We've got 1 and 36. We've got 2 and 18, 3 and 12. We've got 4 and 9. And if we look at adding these, we get 37, 20, 15 and 13. And you see a 13 right there. Okay. So that's going to be x plus 4, x plus 9 when we solve it. And then we end up with x equals minus 4, x equals minus 9. And again, these are the x-intercepts. Here is our y-intercept. And looking here, there's no negative sign right there, is there? So that would mean it's going to be a U shape. And so I can go ahead and sketch this. Remember, it's just a sketch. What you should be doing here is looking at your numbers. So I've got a minus 4, a minus 9, and I have this 36 right there. 3 numbers to worry about. Which one's the biggest? Of course it's the 36, so that's the one I should be putting on first. And then, doesn't really matter about the other two. So negative 4, I could just say is roughly here. And then 9, I'll just say is there. Okay? So it's a U-shaped graph again. Oh, sorry. That's completely wrong, I've just realised. I thought something was wrong there. So my negative 9, let's move these around a little bit. Put my negative 9 here. So basically, your graph should be smack bang in the middle of these two. It should always be symmetrical down the middle. And it should go through these 2 points here. So forming a U shape. So just like that. Through the minus 4, and it also has to go through this this 36 here. So through that, and then carrying on up through that 3 marks, and that's how you do it. Okay. This thing at the bottom is what we call a turning point. I'm not going to talk about these today, but in future videos I'm going to talk about what these are and how we can find them as well. So I'm just going to do one more of those. Sorry, not solve, sketch. Let's do this. A bit different to the ones we've done before. And it's a lot harder to work it out, okay? Solve it. So obviously our first step in sketching was solve. So we need to solve when this is equal to 0. But this time we actually have a negative number. So you have to be a bit more careful when you've got a negative number. Because what we have here is we could have a negative multiplied by a positive, which would give us a negative, or we could have a positive times by a negative to give us a negative. Okay, so then that means I could have 1 and negative 12, I could have negative 1 and 12, I could have 2 and negative 6, I could have negative 2 and 6, I can have 3 and minus 4, and minus 3 and 4. And you see there's a lot more combinations to worry about there. Okay, so basically you've got to add these together, which is a lot harder, isn't it? So I'm just going to show you a few tricks. So if I had 8, negative 8 add 5, I'll show you how I would do this. So what I actually do is I think of the difference in the 2 numbers first. So the difference in these 2 numbers is 3. And then just look at which number's larger, which is the 8. And notice it has a negative sign in front of it. And so the answer would be minus 3 for this one. Now I could have minus 19 add 27. So firstly, think of the difference in these two numbers. The difference would be 8. And then looking at which number's bigger, it's actually the 27. Noticing that's a positive number, and so the answer would be a positive 8. Okay, and that's how we do it. So looking at these, I've got 1 and 12, difference being 11. 12 is bigger and it's negative. Now here we've got 1 and 12 again, difference is 11, but the 12 is the bigger number and it's actually positive this time. So you should always notice that they'll be opposite in sign. Okay. So basically these two will be 4s, but which one's the negative one? Now looking at this one, you can see that the 6 is the bigger number and it's negative. So it's that one. Here we've got a difference of 1. 4 is the larger number and it's negative here, so that's the negative. And there we go. Now which of these line up? You might be saying none of them because we don't see a number there, but there's actually a 1 hidden there. So if you see minus x, it's actually minus 1x, okay? So just be aware of that. Same as if you see an x on its own, it's actually a 1x. And there's actually a 1 here as well, so just be aware of that. Okay, so we're looking for a minus 1 basically. And you can see we have that here, so our correct pair would be that one. Right, so then we're going to reverse the signs. Get negative 3 and positive 4. So here are my x-intercepts. Looking back up here, that would be my y-intercept. And looking at that, we have a U shape again. So let's go ahead and sketch it. Right, so x-intercepts first. I've got these, minus 3 and 4. So I can put them on there. And then I've got a y-intercept of negative 12 this time. So that's actually a lot further down. Draw this fairly accurate this time. So we've got 3 there, 6, 9. 12 is going to be right down here. Okay, so negative 12 that is. And this is the y-axis, that's the x-axis. Remember it's a U shape as well. You might be wondering where the bottom is. Now, it's always smack bang in the middle of these two numbers. So it should be slightly to the right side since 4 is a bigger number. So the middle is actually going to be slightly this way. And it should also be a bit lower than the y-intercept. You should always notice that when you do these. So it's going to be lower and to the right. So let's just say it's about here, the bottom. It's got to go through that point, so I'll make sure it goes through there first. And then it's also got to go through the minus 3. So going up like that, through the minus 3. And then it curves around. It's going to come nicely up through the 4. So there you go. And remember, it's just a sketch. So as long as you go through these points, you're good. I hope that helped anyway. I'll be producing some more videos on quadratics, so do let me know if there's anything you want me to cover specifically, but I will be covering everything. Thank you. Like and subscribe if this did help.